Hey guys, tonight we plunge headfirst into the biting darkness of medieval cold nights, where frost isn't just a decoration on windows, it's a relentless, biting enemy that creeps under every crevice, making you question how on earth anyone could survive. You trudge through biting winds, with breath puffing out like steam in the dead air, wondering if you'll make it till dawn. Honestly, you probably won't survive this without their secrets, so brace yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious to know who's cozying up with me right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun dips below the horizon, and with it, the warmth of the day evaporates quickly. In medieval times, the cold wasn't just uncomfortably, it was deadly. Winter nights could last upwards of 14 hours, with temperatures plunging well below freezing. Imagine you're in a small village somewhere in northern Europe. The only light comes from a flickering hearth inside a modest timber-framed home. Outside, snow crunches underfoot, and the wind howls like a banshee through gaps in the wooden walls. You shiver involuntarily, feeling the cold seep through your thin clothing and settle deep into your bones. The medieval calendar didn't only mark days, it was a countdown to the long, unforgiving nights. People planned their lives around these seasonal shifts. Nightfall wasn't just a time for rest, it was trial by cold fire. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood the science of heat retention, or if they simply learned through brutal trial and error what helped them to survive. One chilling fact: frostbite could set in within minutes if you were exposed to the elements without protection. The cold didn't discriminate young, old, healthy, or sick. Everyone faced the risk. And unlike today, there was no central heating, electric blankets, or insulated homes. Your only defenses were nature, ingenuity, and whatever meager resources you could scrounge up. But the medieval night wasn't entirely hopeless. In the shadows of those freezing hours, peasants developed survival tricks, a simple, humble methods often forgotten by modern times. Tonight, you're about to learn them, one breath-stealing, shiver-inducing secret at a time. As the night tightens its grip, you realize that surviving the cold starts long before you even lie down. One of the most unassuming yet effective tricks medieval peasants relied on was something you probably overlook every day: straw and hay. You might think, straw? Isn't that just farm stuff? Well, yes, but in the right hands, straw became a surprisingly cozy defense against the chill. Picture your humble bed, a simple wooden frame stuffed with bundles of straw or hay, layered thick like nature's own insulation blanket. This wasn't just any bedding, the straw trapped tiny pockets of warm air, creating a natural barrier that kept the cold creeping through the floor at bay. In fact, straw was so prized that villagers often gathered it carefully, sometimes even reusing it year after year, making sure their beds stayed as toasty as possible. You settle down onto this prickly mattress, feeling the warmth from your body slowly get trapped in the straw beneath you. It's not exactly cloud9, but it's better than the cold, hard floor. The sharp scent of dry grass fills the air, oddly comforting amidst the biting cold. The straw even muffled sounds, giving you a cocoon of quiet that feels safe. Now, here's a quirky twist. Some peasants went a step further by layering their straw beds with dried animal dung. Yes, that kind of dung. It sounds gross, but dried cow or horse manure is a surprisingly good insulator, thanks to the methane gas trapped inside. It's a fringe practice, and historians still argue whether this was widespread or limited to a few isolated communities. But the idea that something so unappealing could keep you warm certainly challenges our modern squeamishness. Beyond bedding, straw was also used in walls and roofs to add insulation. Those thatched roofs you imagine weren't just for looks. The whole village relied on straw's insulating magic to keep cold at bay, a renewable resource that didn't cost much but saved many lives. Of course, straw had its downsides. It was highly flammable, which meant that sleeping too close to the hearth or careless handling of candles could turn your cozy bed into a disaster. Still, in the constant battle against winter's chill, it was a risk peasants willingly took. So next time you complain about your mattress, remember that medieval peasants braved the cold wrapped in straw and, occasionally, a little dung warmth. It's humble, a little rough, and definitely not luxurious, but it worked. And that's the kind of gritty, make-do survival that helped them endure the longest, coldest nights. The cold bites through your bones, but there's a warm, living heat you might not have considered: the animals. You've heard the phrase pets keep you company, but in medieval times, barn animals were more than just companions. They were your personal, furry heaters. Imagine a chilly night in your cramped cottage, the fire barely flickering low. Outside, the bitter wind howls, but inside, the steady breathing and body warmth of animals fill the room with a quiet, soothing heat. Cows, sheep, goats, even pigs. These creatures often shared the same space as people during winter nights. It wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a survival tactic. You press your back against the barn wall, close enough to your animals to steal their warmth, feeling the steady pulse of life that no fire could quite replicate. Your clothes may be thin, your blanket threadbare, but the gentle heat radiating from their bodies keeps frostbite at bay. This practice was so common that some villages had shared barns attached to living quarters, a cozy but smelly arrangement by modern standards. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Historians still argue whether people intentionally kept animals indoors primarily for warmth or simply because of limited space and security concerns. Did peasants wake up in the night hoping for a warm snuggle from the cow? Or was it just a side effect of practical barn keeping? Quirky enough, some records even suggest peasants believed animals possessed a kind of a life energy that could be transferred to humans in the cold, a superstition that likely helped people psychologically endure the brutal nights. Whether science or superstition, the presence of animals undeniably helped keep the chill at bay. But living so close to animals also came with health risks. Lice, fleas, and other pests were unwelcome guests. You have to wonder how much your sleep was disturbed by itchy bugs versus the cold. Still, the warmth was worth it. So next time you cuddle your pet for comfort, remember medieval peasants might have been onto something. Sometimes, the best heating system isn't electric, but a warm, breathing body right beside you. By now, you're likely imagining yourself wrapped in layers of odd-smelling straw and snuggled against a cow, or maybe wondering if you'll ever feel warm again. Luckily, medieval peasants had another line of defense against the cold: their clothing. But this wasn't about fashion, it was pure, practical survival. Layered clothing was their medieval winter uniform, a makeshift armor against frostbite and chills. Think of it this way: you don't just throw on one big coat and call it a day. Instead, you wear multiple garments, often made of wool, linen, or animal skins, each layer trapping warm air and blocking the wind. You pull on a coarse linen shirt, then a woolen tunic, maybe a heavier cloak, and finally a hood or hat to protect your head because, spoiler alert, you lose a lot of heat through your noggin. Interestingly, layering wasn't just about warmth. Sometimes peasants wore seemingly strange combinations like linen next to skin, then wool, then fur, balancing comfort, warmth, and available resources. Historians still argue whether these combinations were standardized or wildly varied village to village, depending on climate, wealth, and access to materials. One quirky tidbit: in some places, peasants wore multiple pairs of stockings or wrapped strips of cloth tightly around their legs to create a rudimentary insulation barrier. You can almost picture someone wincing while squeezing into those thick wrappings. But hey, survival sometimes trumps comfort. Layering also extended to accessories. Mittens, scarves, and woolen caps were more than just extras, they were essential. The wealthy might have had fancier, better quality fabrics, but peasants made do with what they had, often recycling old clothes or sharing garments among family members. The smell? Well, that was part of the charm: a mixed sense of wool, sweat, and sometimes a hint of smoke from the hearth. Of course, layering had its downsides. Too many layers could restrict movement or cause overheating near the fire, and wet clothes were a nightmare. Waterlogged wool loses its insulating power, turning you into a walking ice cube. So, while you might roll your eyes at the idea of wearing every piece of clothing you own just to survive a cold night, remember, medieval peasants mastered the art of layering out of necessity. It wasn't fashion, it was life or death. The flicker of the hearth isn't just a comforting glow, it's the heart of the medieval home's warmth, but it's a tricky beast to manage. You can almost feel the heat radiating from the fire as it dances against the dark wooden walls, promising safety and warmth. But living so close to open flames was no joke. The hearth's role was much more than just a source of light. It was the centerpiece of survival during those cold nights. Picture the typical peasant home, a single-room cottage with a large central hearth, where cooking, heating, and sometimes even sleeping happened in the same space. The fire was a constant companion, carefully tended from dusk till dawn, to keep the biting cold at bay. You huddle close to it, feeling the warmth soak into your chilled skin. The smell of burning wood mixes with the scent of damp earth and worn leather, creating that unmistakable medieval aroma. But here's the catch. Managing the hearth was a balancing act. Too little fire, and the cold seeped in like a thief. Too much, and you risked setting your straw-filled bed or thatched roof ablaze. Fires occasionally caused devastating blazes that could reduce entire villages to ashes. Plus, the the smoke. It could be suffocating in poorly ventilated cottages, making breathing a challenge. Some peasants even suffered from soot-related health issues. Despite these risks, the hearth was essential. It wasn't just warmth, it was the place where food was cooked, water boiled for medicinal herbs, and family gathered. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood the science behind airflow and smoke management or if it was purely trial and error, guided by generations of whispered warnings and luck. Quirky enough, in some regions, special hearth designs were used like stone-lined pits or small chimneys to reduce smoke indoors and improve heat efficiency. You can almost hear the crackle and pop, that comforting yet precarious sound of survival. So, the hearth was a double-edged sword, a life-giving flame and a dangerous force. But without it, those frigid nights would have been even harsher, making its care a nightly ritual wrapped in respect and fear. As you shift in your straw bed, the cold gnaws at you, reminding you that warmth isn't just about fire or clothes, it's also about how you hold your body. Medieval peasants weren't just tossing and turning, they had learned the art of conserving precious body heat through sleeping positions. It's a survival tactic that might sound simple but was actually quite clever. Imagine curling up tight into a ball, limbs tucked close to your torso like a hibernating animal. This position minimizes the surface area exposed to cold air, trapping warmth where it counts most. It's a natural instinct. You do it when you're cold, and peasants embraced it as part of their nightly defense. Sometimes, you'd press your back against a thick wall, stone or timber, letting it block chilly drafts and radiate any residual warmth. But that's not all. Some peasants slept head to toe with family members or even neighbors in the same bed, stacking warmth like bricks in a wall. The crowded sleeping arrangements were more than a social norm, they were strategic. Historians still debate how common this practice was across different regions and social classes, but there's plenty of evidence that it helped people survive the coldest nights. Here's a quirky detail. In some places, people wrapped their feet in layers of cloth or tucked them under their neighbors' blankets to share warmth directly. You can almost feel the awkwardness of a room full of people trying not to kick each other in their sleepy attempts to stay warm. Sleeping close to the hearth or fire was another positioning tactic, but as we've seen, that came with fire hazards and smoke issues. Instead, the walls, especially those made of thick stone or packed earth, acted as passive heaters, slowly releasing warmth accumulated during the day. So, next time you complain about your blanket not being warm enough, think about how medieval peasants twisted and curled their bodies, becoming human heat batteries in the relentless fight against winter's chill. As the cold seeps into your bones, you might crave something to soothe that relentless chill, a warm drink or a herbal remedy to ease your frozen muscles. Medieval peasants turned to nature's pharmacy, brewing concoctions that were part medicine, part magic, and part comfort. You can almost smell the mix of herbs steeping over the fire, a steamy, earthy aroma filling the cramped room. Common herbs like rosemary, thyme, and mint were staples, believed to warm the body and ward off sickness. Hot infusions of these herbs served as a mild stimulant, helping blood flow and providing a mental lift during those long, dark hours. Sometimes, these drinks included honey or a splash of mead, turning bitter herbs into a sweet, drinkable warmth. But here's where it gets interesting. Some recipes called for more unusual ingredients, like mustard seed or even dried nettles. Historians still argue whether these concoctions truly had medicinal effects or if their benefits were mostly psychological, a placebo warming your spirits when the nights were harshest. A quirky tidbit: in certain regions, peasants rubbed warming salves made from animal fats mixed with herbs directly onto their skin before bed. Imagine slathering yourself in a greasy, herbal goo in hopes it would keep frostbite at bay. It's not the most pleasant thought, but desperate times called for desperate measures. These herbal practices weren't just about fighting cold, they were also deeply tied to local folklore and superstition. Some believed that the right herbal mixture could chase away evil spirits that caused nightmares or sickness during winter. The boundary between medicine and magic was delightfully blurry. So, as you sip your modern cup of tea, think of those medieval brews, a rustic, strange, but crafted with care and hope. They may not have been cures, but they were a crucial part of surviving the cold, both physically and mentally. The cold outside is unforgiving, but inside your small cottage, you're not alone. Entire families and sometimes even neighbors crowded into one space, huddled close to share warmth. Communal sleeping wasn't just about saving space, it was a deliberate survival strategy against the biting cold. Picture a narrow bed or simple straw mattress, with multiple bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, sharing the precious heat radiating from skin and breath. You wake up feeling the warmth of your siblings or parents around you, their steady breathing a rhythmic lullaby amid the frost. It's a cramped existence, but in winter, close proximity was your best defense. The social dynamics here get interesting. Historians still debate how much communal sleeping was driven by necessity versus cultural norms. Was it always a practical choice? Or did the social fabric of medieval villages encourage this closeness year-round? Either way, it meant that personal space was a luxury few could afford. There's also a quirky side to this. Some accounts suggest that peasants believed the warmth from multiple people could ward off the evil cold that caused illness. It's a fascinating blend of folk belief and practical survival. Imagine sharing body heat not just to keep warm but to keep spirits safe. Of course, communal sleeping brought challenges. Crowded spaces meant less air circulation, which sometimes worsened respiratory illnesses. Plus, it was impossible to avoid the occasional midnight kick or snore, but those were small prices to pay for warmth. So, as you stretch out alone in your cozy bed tonight, spare a thought for those medieval families who squeezed together like puzzle pieces, turning closeness into a lifeline against the cold. By now, your body feels the importance of what you are wearing, and the fabrics that clung to medieval peasants weren't just random choices, they were carefully selected for warmth, durability, and availability. Wool, linen, and animal skins formed the triad of medieval textiles, each with its own strengths and quirks. Wool was the superstar for cold survival. It's naturally insulating, even when damp, and breathable enough to prevent overheating by day. You imagine pulling on a coarse, itchy woolen tunic, definitely not the soft sweater you're used to, but effective at trapping heat. Linen, on the other hand, was lighter and usually worn next to the skin, acting like a breathable base layer. Animal skins, often from deer or sheep, were used as cloaks or bed coverings, adding an extra barrier against wind and frost. Historians still argue how widespread access to quality wool really was among peasants. Was it something every villager owned in decent amounts, or a luxury reserved for those with livestock? Evidence suggests a patchwork reality. Some had plenty, others made do with rougher materials or hand-me-downs. Here's a quirky detail. In some cold regions, peasants fashioned their shoes and boots from thick animal hide, stuffed with straw or wool for insulation. These makeshift boots were essential for trudging through snow and ice, even if they looked, well, a bit ridiculous. Fabric production was labor-intensive via spinning wool into yarn, weaving cloth, tanning hide, and most peasants either made their own or relied on local craftswomen. Clothes were often patched and repaired multiple times, each stitch telling a story of survival. The smell factor. Woolen skins carried the earthy, musty sense of the outdoors, definitely not fresh laundry, but to peasants, it was a sign of a well-used, useful garment. So, your warm fleece jacket tonight is a far cry from the rugged, practical textiles medieval peasants depended on. Yet, it's these humble materials that truly shaped how they braved winter's wrath. Ah, alcohol, the eternal warming myth. You've probably heard the advice, have a drink to keep warm, but here's the cold, hard truth. Medieval peasants drank plenty of ale, mead, and cider during the long nights, but whether it actually helped them survive the cold is a bit more complicated. You imagine sitting by the fire with a wooden mug of ale in hand. The bitter taste warms your throat and dulls the chill for a moment. Alcohol causes your blood vessels to dilate, making you feel warm as more blood rushes to your skin's surface. It's a deceptive warmth. The historians still argue how much this warming effect actually helped versus how much it sped up heat loss. Some medieval medical texts warned against overindulging in alcohol during cold weather, suggesting it could lead to dangerous hypothermia. Yet, drinking was a common part of social and family life, especially during winter festivals and gatherings when the cold was most brutal. A quirky fact, in some villages, peasants would mix their drinks with warming spices like cinnamon or ginger, turning their ale or mead into a primitive hot toddy of sorts. This not only made the drink tastier but possibly added mild warming properties. Modern science confirms that while alcohol might make you feel warmer, it actually lowers your core body temperature by drawing heat away from vital organs. So, that cozy fireside buzz comes with a hidden cost. Still, in the harsh reality of medieval winters, a little ale was more than just comfort. It was a brief escape from the relentless cold and the hard grind of survival. It helped ease social bonds, kept spirits high, and sometimes even dulled the pain of frost-nipped fingers. So, the next time you reach for a warm drink in winter, remember the medieval peasants' bittersweet dance with alcohol. A flicker of warmth with a shadow of danger. You felt the fire's heat, smelled the smoky air, and maybe even tasted the bitter ale. But medieval peasants had another crafty way to keep warm after the flames died down: heated stones, bricks, and embers. It's a trick that sounds almost too simple, yet it was a reliable source of fireless warmth through the coldest hours. Imagine this: before bedtime, you'd heat a large, flat stone or a brick in the hearth's embers until it glowed faintly red. Then, carefully wrapped in cloth or tucked inside a wooden box, you'd bring this warm treasure to your bed. Placing it near your feet or under your blankets, the stone would slowly radiate heat throughout the night, like a cozy, natural radiator. This method was especially useful in homes where tending the fire through the night was too risky or impossible. It provided a steady, gentle warmth without the dangers of smoke or open flames. Plus, it saved precious fuel. Wood was often scarce and valuable during winter months. Here's a quirky detail: some peasants even carried small heated stones in their pockets as portable hand warmers when venturing out on frosty mornings. It's a quaint image: a wool-clad person clutching a hot rock, like a medieval version of a modern hand warmer. Historians still debate how widespread and effective this practice was, but archaeological findings and old writings give us glimpses into this ingenious heat hack. The heat retention depended heavily on the type of stone and how well it was insulated, but even a few hours of warmth could make a critical difference. Of course, handling hot stones came with its own risks. Burns were common, especially among children. Still, it was a small price for a warm night's sleep. So, next time you tuck a hot water bottle into bed, remember the medieval pebble heaters: a simple, natural, and surprisingly effective companions through the frost. The cold doesn't just come from the night, it sneaks in through walls, windows, and cracks in your home. So, surviving winter wasn't just about clothing or fire, it was also about the very place you called home. Peasant houses were built tough, designed to block out the biting chill as much as possible. Imagine a tiny cottage with thick walls made of packed earth, stone, or timber logs. These materials had natural insulating properties, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it slowly at night. The windows were small, often just tiny holes covered with oiled parchment or cloth instead of glass, because big openings let precious warmth escape and cold air in. Roofs were usually thatched with straw or reeds, adding an extra layer of insulation. These thatched roofs weren't just rustic decorations, they were critical shields against wind and snow. Inside, low ceilings helped keep warm air close to the occupants, while narrow doorways limited drafts. The floor might be bare earth, but sometimes covered with rushes or straw, adding a little insulation underfoot. In some places, Peasants even built their beds up off the floor, not just to avoid cold but also pests and dampness. Historians still argue about how much regional climate influenced these designs. So were some cottages better built than others simply because of geography, or did local tradition and resources play a bigger role? A quirky fact: in certain cold regions, peasants dug small trenches or windbreaks around their homes to divert harsh winds, creating microclimates that made their yards slightly warmer. So, the medieval home wasn't just a shelter, it was a carefully crafted fortress against winter's assault. You might think your modern heated house has it all figured out, but these ancient designs were the first front line in the war against cold. By the time dusk settles, you realize surviving the cold isn't a passive gamia, it's a nightly ritual, a choreography of preparation and hope. Peasants developed routines blending practical tasks with age-old superstitions, each step designed to brace themselves for the unforgiving night ahead. First, there's the gathering of firewood, essential to keep the hearth alive through the long hours. You picture villagers hauling bundles from the forest before sunset, stacking them neatly by the door. Then comes the preparation of bedding, fluffing straw mattresses, layering blankets, and positioning warm stones or bricks carefully to maximize their heat. Clothing is inspected and layered once more, scarves and mittens ready at hand. Children are wrapped tightly, sometimes swaddled in additional cloth to retain their precious body heat. Meals are simple but hearty: a porridge, stews, or root vegetable eaten early so digestion can generate internal warmth before bedtime. This nightly routine wasn't just about survival, it was also about calming the mind. Many peasants believed certain rituals, like placing protective herbs by the door or whispering blessings, warded off winter spirits and bad luck. Superstition mingled with necessity in a delicate dance. Historians still debate how much these routines were universal or varied wildly depending on local customs and beliefs. What's clear is that repetition provided comfort, a psychological edge against the despair the cold could bring. A quirky insight: some villages timed their bedtime to coincide with certain moon phases, believing the waxing moon brought more warmth and good fortune. You can almost hear the soft murmur of these traditions echoing in the night. So, as you tuck yourself into night, consider the medieval dance of preparation, a blend of sweat, superstition, and stubborn hope that made cold nights just a bit more bearable. As the cold presses in, it's not just your body fighting, it's your mind. Mental toughness played a surprisingly big role in medieval peasants' survival. You might think that freezing nights were just about blankets and fires, but staying warm was as much psychological as physical. Imagine the long hours of darkness stretching endlessly, with only flickering shadows to keep you company. The mind can become a restless companion, conjuring fears of sickness, hunger, or even the supernatural. To cope, peasants often relied on belief systems and storytelling, creating mental bulwarks against despair. Some believed that warm thoughts, prayers, or charms could actually influence their body's warmth. Others turned to humor and camaraderie, sharing jokes or tales to lift spirits. Historians still argue whether these mental strategies genuinely affected physiological warmth or were primarily emotional comforts. A quirky note: in some areas, people believed that cold could be tricked by imagining sunny landscapes or the warmth of summer days, a kind of medieval mindfulness practice. You can almost picture a tired farmer closing his eyes, envisioning golden fields under a blazing sun to chase the chill away. Psychological resilience also meant accepting discomfort as part of life. Complaints about cold were common, but so were stories praising endurance and grit. This cultural stoicism helped peasants face winter nights without succumbing to panic or despair. So, remember, in the medieval cold, survival wasn't just wrapped in layers, it was carried in the strength of the mind, a warm refuge against the harshest elements. Now, as the cold night winds down and you prepare to close your eyes, it's time to reflect on these forgotten survival tricks and what they whisper to us across the centuries. Medieval peasants, with little more than straw, wool, and willpower, managed to endure bitter nights that would freeze modern comforts solid. Their methods may seem rough or quaint now, but beneath those humble tools lies a profound resiliency and maybe a lesson or two for us. You think about the layering of clothes, the warmth of shared bodies, the flickering hearth, and the magical ember stones nestled in straw beds. These were not just random acts but the results of generations of hard-earned wisdom. Some of these practices still survive in folk traditions or rural lifestyles, while others have slipped quietly into history's shadows. The psychological strength they summon into stories, prayers, hopeful visions. It reminds us that warmth is never just physical. It lives in community, in routine, and in the quiet stubbornness to survive. And while modern technology has largely replaced these old ways, the primal connection to fire, fabric, and flesh remains universal. Historians continue to debate many details about medieval survival, the extent of their knowledge, the influence of superstition, and regional variations, but the core truth is clear. Hey guys, tonight we step into the biting cold and crushing darkness of medieval winters, where surviving the night wasn't just uncomfortably, it was a relentless fight against nature itself. Imagine tramping through knee-deep snow, your breath fogging the frigid air, knowing that without the right tricks, you probably won't survive this night. Sounds cozy, right? Not so much. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who's braving the cold with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a small village. The sun long gone, replaced by a moon hanging cold and distant in the star-studded sky. Winter nights in medieval Europe could stretch up to 14 hours, plunging everything into freezing darkness. There's no electric heat, no thermal gear, just you, your wits, and whatever your humble home provides. The cold isn't just a nuisance, it's a killer. Hypothermia and frostbite were very real threats, and the luxury of modern medicine was nowhere in sight. Historically, winters like the Little Ice Age from the 14th to 19th centuries made these nights even more brutal, causing famines and hardships that shaped entire societies. Your only chance to survive lay in clever, sometimes quirky survival strategies passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether these were conscious innovations or instinctive responses, but one thing's clear: they were essential. So, as the chill creeps beneath your skin and the dark presses close, you prepare to learn how common folk endured the coldest winters, using nothing but grit, nature, and a few surprising tricks. The first barrier between you and the freezing world outside isn't your clothes or fiery, it's your home. Medieval peasant cottages might look humble, but they were surprisingly strategic in holding back the cold. You step inside, feeling the shelter from icy winds, yet the chill still sneaks in through gaps in wooden walls and dirt floors. Typically, these homes were simple one-room structures made from timber frames filled with wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks and mud. Thick thatched roofs of straw or reeds acted like natural insulation, keeping heat in and rain out. Windows, if you could call them that, were tiny holes sometimes covered with enamel-hide or oiled parchment to block drafts. Glass was a rare luxury. Floors were often just packed earth, cold and damp, though sometimes strewn with rushes or straw to add warmth underfoot. Beds were raised off the floor when possible, to avoid the chill rising from below. Historians still debate how effective these materials truly were against the harshest winters, and how much homeowners tried to improve insulation versus simply enduring the cold. Some evidence suggests villagers used mud plaster to seal walls and minimize drafts, while others leaned on bulky curtains and tapestries inside to trap heat. A quirky detail: some cottages had smoke holes in the roof, small openings to vent hearth smoke, which, while essential, also let in cold air. Managing ventilation without losing warmth was a constant battle. So, while these simple homes might seem drafty by modern standards, they were crafted with survival in mind, using available resources to create a fragile, yet vital, shield against winter's bite. You settle near the hearth, at the heart of any medieval home, its flickering flames offering the most reliable warmth through those long, brutal nights. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was the lifeline that kept frostbite at bay and spirits alive. You can almost feel the comforting heat radiating off the firewood, the smoke curling up toward a chimney or sometimes just an opening in the roof. Maintaining the hearth was a full-time job. Peasants had to gather enough wood before winter's worst arrived, stacking it carefully to keep the fire burning steadily after dark. A dying hearth meant plunging into freezing darkness, and few things were more terrifying than that cold void. The hearth's design varied, as some had stone surrounds to retain heat longer, others were simple pits in the center of the room. The smoke helped repel insects but also posed health risks. Poor ventilation meant smoky interiors, and chronic respiratory problems were common. Historians still argue whether peasants fully understood how to optimize airflow to reduce smoke or simply learned through generations of trial and error. Here's a quirky fact: some medieval homes featured fire dogs, iron stands used to hold logs and allow air circulation, improving burning efficiency. A medieval upgrade to your modern fireplace grate. Despite its risks, the hearth was the social hub where families gathered, stories were shared, and the cold seemed momentarily less harsh. You can almost hear the crackling wood and soft murmurs of conversation beneath the roar of winter winds. So, while you might curse the smoke detector today, remember medieval peasants lived with smoky rooms because the hearth was the beating heart of survival. You know how layering your clothes seems like a no-brainer today? Well, medieval peasants weren't just copying your winter fashion. A layering was a lifeline. Imagine yourself pulling on a rough linen shirt first, close to the skin, acting like a breathable base. Over that, a woolen tunic or coat. A wool was king for its insulating properties, even when damp. Finally, perhaps a cloak made from animal skins or thick wool to block wind. The layering wasn't just about warmth, it was about managing moisture and mobility. Wet clothing was a death sentence, so breathable layers helped wick sweat away, keeping skin dry and warm. And yes, the textures weren't soft like your favorite fleecia, they were scratchy, heavy, and often reeked of smoke and animal. Historians still debate how much access peasants had to quality wool or animal skins. Some suggest that poorer villagers had to make do with rougher, hand-spun fabrics or second-hand garments, patched and repatched through winter after winter. A quirky survival hack: peasants sometimes wrapped strips of cloth tightly around limbs, creating primitive leg warmers or arm bindings to trap heat and prevent frostbite. You can almost imagine someone struggling to tie their limbs snugly, trying to stay warm without cutting off circulation. Wearing multiple layers could be a balancing act. You risked overheating near the hearth or freezing outside. Wet clothes meant you had to dry them near the fire carefully, lest they catch flame. So, while your modern insulated jacket is a marvel, medieval layering was a gritty, practical armor, one that turned scratchy cloth into a shield against winter's chill. Your bed isn't just a place to crash, it's a fortress against the cold. Medieval peasants often crafted their bedding from layers of straw, hay, and sometimes feathers if they were lucky. Straw mattresses, known as strawticks, were stuffed tightly to create a thick cushion that insulated from the cold, hard floors. You lie down on the straw, feeling its prickly warmth slowly soaking up your body heat. It's not the plush mattress you're used to, it's rough and uneven, but it traps air like a natural blanket. On top, thick woolen blankets or animal pelts added extra warmth. The smell of dried grass mingled with faint animal scents. It was all part of the nightly ritual. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some regions, peasants layered dried cow dung beneath straw in their beds, believing its insulating properties helped retain heat. It might sound gross, but methane trapped in dried dung does provide surprisingly effective insulation. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or localized folk wisdom. Beds were often raised off the floor to avoid drafts and dampness, sometimes built into alcoves within stone walls to protect sleepers from wind. Some peasants even shared beds in close quarters to pool body warmth, but we'll get to that later. So, as you snuggle into your cozy bed tonight, remember those humble straw-filled mattresses that turned simple homes into shelters against medieval winter's bite. The cold is relentless, but surprisingly, one of your warmest allies isn't just your fire or blankets, it's the animals that live alongside you. Imagine sharing your humble cottage with cows, sheep, goats, or pigs, their warm bodies providing a living source of heat on frigid nights. In many villages, it was common for livestock to be brought inside during winter, sometimes even into the same rooms where people slept. The thick fur and steady body heat of these animals created a buffer against the cold air creeping through poorly insulated walls. Historians still argue how intentional this practice was for warmth versus convenience or protection of animals from predators. Either way, the shared living space meant people and animals kept each other alive through bitter weather. A quirky fact: some peasants believed that the life force or a warmth of animals could be transferred to humans, a folk belief that may have given psychological comfort as much as physical heat. Of course, living close to animals came with its own challenges: noise, odors, and pests, but the trade-off was often worth it when survival was at stake. So, next time you cozy up to your pet, remember that medieval peasants depended on the warmth of their barnyard companions in a very literal way. The cold seems to seep into every corner of your life, but one of the oldest and most effective ways to fight it is simple: people. Communal living wasn't just a social choice, it was a survival strategy. Families, and sometimes entire households, huddled together at night to share body warmth, creating a human heat bank against the unforgiving chill. You can almost feel the pressed together bodies in a small, smoke-filled cottage, stacked side by side on narrow beds or straw mats. Personal space was a luxury none could afford in winter. Children, parents, even the elderly clustered tightly, trading warmth through close contact. Historians still debate how common communal sleeping was across different regions and classes, but many accounts agree it was essential during harsh winters. Here's a quirky tidbit: some records suggest that neighbors would even sleep together in times of extreme cold, blurring the lines of family and community to survive. Of course, this closeness brought challenges: limited air circulation, the spread of illnesses, and the occasional midnight elbow, but warmth was the priority. So, as you drift to sleep in your spacious, heated room tonight, spare a thought for those who relied on the warmth of many bodies pressed together to survive the longest nights. When the fire dies down and the night stretches long, medieval peasants had a clever trick to keep their beds warm without constant tending to the hearth: heated stones and embers. Imagine taking a large, flat stone, heating it in the fire until it glows faintly, then carefully wrapping it in cloth before tucking it under your blankets. The stone slowly releases stored heat through the night, providing a cozy, fireless warmth that was crucial when fuel was scarce or the fire had to be left unattended. This practice wasn't just for beds. Some peasants carried small heated stones in their pockets as portable hand warmers on frosty mornings, a medieval version of today's heat packs. Historians still debate how widespread this method was and how effective it truly was, but archaeological finds and written accounts give solid evidence of its use. A quirky detail: in some regions, people used hollowed-out bricks filled with hot embers to radiate heat safely without burning bedding materials. Handling these hot objects was risky burns or common, but the benefits outweighed the dangers. So, while modern central heating has made our lives easier, the simple warmth of a hot stone remains a testament to medieval ingenuity and determination to endure winter's chill. As the cold gnaws deeper, peasants turned to the gifts of nature to keep warm from the inside out: herbs and hot drinks brewed to comfort and heal. You can almost smell the pungent aroma of rosemary, thyme, and mint steeping in boiling water, filling the air with an earthy warmth that's both soothing and medicinal. These herbal infusions weren't just tasty, they were believed to stimulate circulation and chase away cold-related ailments. Sometimes, honey or a splash of mead sweetened the brew, turning bitter herbs into comforting potions. Historians still argue whether these remedies had real physiological effects or if their power lay mainly in placebo and tradition. A quirky tidbit: some peasants rubbed warming salves made from animal fats mixed with herbs directly onto their skin before bed, hoping to fend off frostbite. Not exactly a spot treatment by today's standards, but a practical solution born from experience. These remedies were often wrapped in superstition and ritual. Certain herbs were thought to ward off evil spirits that roamed cold winter nights, blurring the line between medicine and magic. So next time you sip your herbal tea, remember that medieval peasants relied on nature's bounty not just for warmth, but for hope against winter's relentless grip. You've probably heard the old saying that a nip of alcohol will warm you up. Medieval peasants certainly believed it, too, and winter nights were often punctuated by mugs of ale, mead, or cider. The warm glow you feel after a drink comes from alcohol's ability to dilate blood vessels near the skin, creating a sensation of warmth as more blood rushes to the surface. But here's the catch. This warmth actually causes your core body temperature to drop, making you more vulnerable to hypothermia. Medieval medical texts warned against excessive drinking during cold weather, yet alcohol remained a staple in the diet partly because it was safer than water, partly for the comfort it provided in harsh conditions. Historians still debate how much peasants understood about these effects, and whether the warming myth was perpetuated by a need for morale as much as physiology. A quirky fact, in some areas, warming spices like cinnamon and ginger were added to drinks, creating a medieval version of the hot toddy. These spices may have provided mild viscillation and a comforting flavor, making the concoction feel more effective. Despite its drawbacks, alcohol played an important social and psychological role, easing the hardships of cold winters by bringing people together and numbing the bite of frost. So, while you might enjoy a winter cocktail, remember medieval peasants' bittersweet dance with alcohol, a fleeting warmth with a hidden chill. As the fire dims and the night grows colder, peasants turned to rituals and routines that blended practicality with superstition. Before settling into their beds, they prepared both body and mind for the harsh hours ahead. Gathering firewood, arranging straw beds, layering clothes, each task was a deliberate step in their nightly dance of survival. They hung bundles of protective herbs near doorways, whispered prayers or incantations, and followed local customs believed to ward off evil spirits lurking in winter's darkness. Historians still debate how much of this was deeply held belief versus cultural habit, but these rituals provided comfort and a sense of control when the cold felt overwhelming. A quirky detail, in some villages, bedtime was timed with the moon's phases, thought to influence warmth and fortune. People believed sleeping under a waxing moon brought better protection against the cold and disease. This blend of routine and superstition wasn't just about survival, it was psychological armor. The familiar rituals helped ease anxiety and brought community together, turning fear into resilience. So, as you prepare for bed tonight, imagine these medieval routines equal parts sweat, hope, and superstition that made winter's longest nights a little less daunting. Your body position as you settle down isn't just about comfort, it's a vital tactic in keeping warm when the chill threatens to seep inside. Medieval peasants learned to conserve precious body heat by curling tightly, minimizing exposed skin and reducing heat loss. You imagine yourself huddling like a bear in hibernation, limbs pulled close, body compact, sleeping close to walls, especially stone or timber walls that absorb daytime heat, offered another layer of protection, buffering cold drafts. Families often slept piled together in cramped quarters, creating a collective warmth that was far greater than any individual could muster. Historians still debate how widespread these sleeping arrangements were, and how much they were driven by necessity versus cultural norms. In some regions, separate beds for each family member were luxury, and most, communal sleeping was survival. Here's a quirky insight. Some peasants wrapped their feet tightly in strips of cloth or even fur, crafting rudimentary foot warmers that protected extremities most vulnerable to frostbite. While modern beds and blankets offer us cozy comfort, medieval sleeping positions were a pragmatic, sometimes uncomfortable, defense in the Cold War that winter waged each night. You might think cold is only a physical challenge, but surviving medieval winters demanded a fierce mental game. Peasants developed psychological resiliency, an ability to endure discomfort, fear, and isolation through belief, humor, and sheer stubbornness. Imagine the endless darkness stretching like a void, the cold pressing in like a silent enemy. To withstand this, people told stories, sang songs, and shared jokes to lighten heavy hearts. Some believed warm thoughts, prayers, or charms could actually keep the cold at bay. Mental shields as important as wool or fire. Historians still argue how much these mental strategies affected physical endurance. Was it placebo, cultural conditioning, or something deeper in human nature? Whatever the answer, these attitudes fostered a stoicism essential to survival. A quirky note, in some places, peasants practiced a form of medieval mindfulness, imagining summer warmth or sunny landscapes to trick the mind into feeling warmer. It's like the ancient precursor to modern visualization techniques. So, the next time you shiver in winter, remember that your ancestors fought frost with both body and mind, a blend of grit, belief, and hope that warmed them from within. Keeping your clothing in decent shape during winter was no easy task, but for medieval peasants, it was a matter of life and death. With limited resources, garments were worn year after year, patched, darned, and carefully mended to hold together through freezing months. You can almost see a woman hunched over her needle, stitching holes in coarse wool or linen by the dim glow of a candle. Clothes were often turned inside out to extend their life, and scraps of fabric were prized for patching. The smell of mending, a mix of smoke, wool, and sweat, filled the air. Historians still debate the availability of dyes and quality fabrics for peasants, but it's clear that most had to make do with what they had. Leather boots, often stuffed with straw for insulation, were repaired repeatedly, as replacing footwear was costly. A quirky tidbit: some peasants sprinkled powdered chalk or ashes on their clothes to freshen them or reduce odor. An early, if rudimentary, deodorizing hack. Caring for clothes wasn't just about warmth, it was about dignity and survival. A well-maintained garment could mean the difference between protection from the cold and a deadly chill. So, your modern wardrobe might be vast and disposable, but medieval peasants' patched and mended clothes carried stories of resilience and careful stewardship. As the long night winds down and the first pale light of dawn creeps through the small window, you reflect on the lessons these medieval winters whisper across time. The common folk endured bitter cold with little more than raw determination, frayed clothes, and a handful of ingenious tricks, a proof that resilience isn't just about resources, but heart. You think of the thatched roofs and stone walls standing guard, the warm glow of the hearth, and the crowded bodies pressed close for shared heat. You remember the heated stones nestled in straw beds, the bitter herbal brews warming hands and spirits, and the layered garments worn like armor against frost's relentless siege. Historians continue to debate the precise details of these survival strategies, but the core truth is undeniable: survival was a delicate dance between nature's harshness and human ingenuity. Today, when we turn up our thermostats or slip into insulated gear, these ancient methods can still inspire us not just to appreciate modern comforts but to understand the profound bond between people, place, and perseverance. So, as you pull your blanket tighter and breathe the warmth of your home, carry with you the quiet strength of those who endured the coldest winters, their stories woven into the fabric of survival itself. Hey guys, tonight we step into the bone-chilling darkness that medieval peasants faced each night, where frostbite and hypothermia weren't just scary words, they were very real threats lurking just outside your door. Imagine trudging through the bitter cold, breath puffing wide in the air, knowing that without the right tricks, you probably won't survive this night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who's braving the cold with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The medieval winter night is long and merciless, sometimes stretching up to 14 hours of freezing darkness. You're in a small village, with nothing but a flickering hearth inside your wooden cottage to keep the frost at bay. Outside, the wind howls, snow drifts pile high, and the cold seeps through cracks in the walls. You shiver as the temperature drops well below freezing, and the threat of frostbite gnaws at your fingers and toes. Historians tell us that these winters shaped entire societies. The infamous Little Ice Age, for example, plunged Europe into decades of harsh cold, famine, and struggle. The common folk had no central heating, no thermal gear, only their wits, clothing, and homes to protect them. Survival meant outsmarting the cold every single night. Scholars still debate how much peasants understood about cold and warmth scientifically versus relying on passed-down wisdom and superstition. What's clear is that their methods, sometimes quirky and crude, were essential for enduring these bone-chilling nights. So, as the cold creeps beneath your skin and the dark wraps around your village, you're about to learn how medieval peasants stayed alive through the harshest, coldest nights. You step inside your humble peasant home, and immediately you feel the fragile barrier keeping the freezing world at bay. These cottages might look simple, but every timber beam, thatched roof, and mud wall was chosen to shield you from winter's relentless chill. Peasant homes were often built from timber frames filled with wattle and daub, a lattice of sticks plastered with mud and straw. This combination provided insulation, sealing out drafts and trapping what little heat the hearth could generate. The roofs, thickly thatched with straw or reeds, were surprisingly effective at shedding snow and keeping the interior dry and warm. Windows were tiny, sometimes just holes covered with animal hide or oiled parchment because glass was expensive and rare. These small openings minimized heat loss but made interiors dim and gloomy. Floors were often packed earth, cold and damp, though sometimes strewn with rushes or straw to add a layer of insulation beneath your feet. Historians still debate the overall effectiveness of these materials and whether peasants actively improved insulation or simply endured the drafts. Some evidence suggests mud plaster was regularly reapplied to seal gaps, while heavy curtains and tapestries helped trap warmth inside. A quirky detail: many cottages had smoke holes in the roof for hearth ventilation, which let in cold air alongside smoke, making managing warmth a delicate balancing act. So, while your modern home might boast double glazing and central heating, these simple medieval dwellings were the front-line defense in the battle against winter's bite. The hearth is the heartbeat of your medieval home, a flickering source of life in the deep freeze. You settle close, feeling the heat radiate from burning logs, the dancing flames casting shadows on rough wooden walls. It's more than just warmth, it's safety, comfort, and the gathering point of family life. Fire was precious and precarious. Wood had to be gathered and stored well before winter's harshest days. Keeping the hearth burning through long nights was a constant task. Too little fire, and the cold would invade too much, and the risk of accidental fires rose dramatically, especially in homes stuffed with straw and wooden beams. Smoke often filled the small rooms, as many cottages lacked proper chimneys, just open hearths venting through a hole or a rudimentary flue. This smoky atmosphere caused respiratory issues, a common medieval affliction. Historians still argue how much knowledge peasants had about ventilation and how much was trial and error passed through generations. A quirky fact: some homes used fire dogs, iron stands to hold logs above the hearth floor, improving airflow and burning efficiency. It was medieval technology aimed at maximizing warmth while minimizing smoke. The hearth was also the social hub, meals cooked, stories told, and bonds forged by the firelight. Without it, the nights would have been unbearably cold and lonely. So, while today you might complain about the smell of burning wood or smoke alarms, remember medieval peasants lived with this smoky reality as their lifeline against the cold. You might think layering clothes is just a modern winter hack, but medieval peasants mastered this art long before down jackets existed. You imagine yourself pulling on a scratchy linen shirt, followed by a thick woolen tunic, topped with an animal skin cloak that blocks biting wind. This was their winter armor. Wool was prized as it insulates even when damp, breathable enough to keep sweat from chilling the skin. Linen, worn closest to the body, helped wick moisture away. Animal skins provided windproof outer layers. Layering these materials trapped warm air between fabrics, creating an effective barrier against frost. Historians still debate how widespread quality wool was among peasants. Wealthier villagers had finer materials, poorer folk made do with rough, patched garments. Some even wrapped strips of cloth around legs or arms to make homemade thermal wraps, a quirky but practical hack against frostbite. Wearing many layers had downsides: heavy weight, restricted movement, and the challenge of drying wet clothes. Yet, this scratchy, bulky layering was essential. Without it, exposure meant serious illness or worse. So, while you zip up your modern fleece with ease, remember the medieval folk who braved winter wrapped in layers of coarse cloth, balancing warmth and hardship every cold night. Your bed isn't just a place to rest, it's a fortress against the relentless chill. Medieval peasants crafted their bedding from layers of straw, hay, and sometimes feathers if fortune smiled. Straw mattresses, called ticks, were stuffed tightly to create thick, insulating cushions that kept the cold ground at bay. You settle onto the rough straw, feeling its prickly warmth slowly absorbing your body heat. It's far from plush. Imagine lying on a bed of dried grass, but it traps air pockets that act as natural insulation. On top, Thick woolen blankets or animal pelts added another layer of warmth, the smells mingling in a rustic bouquet of earth and smoke. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some regions, peasants layered dried cow dung beneath straw to improve insulation. It sounds gross, but methane trapped in dried dung does provide surprisingly effective heat retention. Historians still debate how common this practice was, but it shows the lengths people went to fight the cold. Beds were often raised to keep sleepers above the damp earth and away from crawling pests. Some peasants shared beds to pool body heat, a communal defense against frostbite we'll explore later. So, as you tuck in tonight, spare a thought for those rough-hewn beds that turned simple homes into havens against medieval winters. The cold doesn't just bite through your clothes, it sneaks under doors and through walls, so having warm companions was a literal lifesaver. Medieval peasants often shared their cramped homes with livestock, turning animals into living heaters. Picture a cow or goat nestled close inside the barn or even the main room, their steady breathing and body heat radiating warmth through the night. Keeping animals indoors served multiple purposes: protection from predators, convenience, and crucially, warmth. Their thick fur and constant body heat created a cozy buffer against the biting cold. You can almost feel the mingling scents of hay, animal musk, and smoke blending in that small space. Historians still debate whether sharing living quarters with animals was an intentional strategy for warmth or primarily practicality and safety. Either way, the benefit of pooled body heat was undeniable. Here's a quirky fact: some folk beliefs held that animals could transfer their life warmth to humans, a comforting idea that likely helped peasants endure winter nights psychologically as well. Of course, living so close meant dealing with pests, noise, and odors. Small prices paid for survival. So next time you cuddle your pet, remember medieval peasants counted on the warmth of their four-legged friends in a very literal, survivalist way. When the cold feels like it's seeping into your very bones, you find that people are your best defense. Imagine a cramped cottage where families and sometimes neighbors huddle closely together, pressing warm bodies against each other to share heat through the bitter night. Communal sleeping wasn't just a choice, it was survival. You can almost feel the warmth radiating from tightly packed bodies lying on straw mats or narrow beds. Privacy was non-existent, but that was a small price for warding off frostbite. This closeness helped preserve precious warmth that no fire or blanket alone could provide. Historians still argue how common communal sleeping was across regions and classes, but the consensus is clear: in the coldest months, it was often necessary. Some records even suggest neighbors would sleep together during extreme cold spells, expanding the circle of warmth. A quirky tidbit: some tales mention villagers using shared blankets or body-sized cloths to maximize heat retention among sleepers, a medieval version of group huddling. Of course, this closeness brought challenges: a spread of illnesses and disrupted sleep, but warmth and survival trumped comfort. So, as you stretch out alone tonight in your heated room, spare a thought for those who relied on each other's bodies to survive the harshest nights. When the hearth's fire dims and the long night stretches on, medieval peasants had a clever secret to keep their beds warm: heated stones and embers. Picture a large, flat stone glowing red from hours spent in the fire, carefully wrapped in cloth and tucked under blankets. It radiates gentle heat, warding off the chill long after the fire has died down. This fireless warmth was crucial when fuel was scarce or tending a fire through the night was too risky. These heated stones, sometimes called bed warmers, acted like early thermal packs, providing consistent heat without smoke or flame. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but archaeological finds and old texts confirm its use in various regions. Some peasants even carried smaller heated stones in their pockets as makeshift hand warmers on frosty mornings. A quirky detail: in some places, hollowed-out bricks filled with hot timber served a similar purpose, radiating warmth safely. Handling these glowing objects wasn't without danger. Burns were common, but the payoff was a warmer night's sleep. So, while we flip a switch for heat today, medieval folk relied on simple, natural methods like these glowing stones to survive bone-chilling winters. When the cold settles deep into your bones, medieval peasants turned to nature's remedies to bring warmth from within. Imagine the fragrant steam rising from a pot of herbal brew, mixtures of rosemary, thyme, mint, and other local plants steeping by the fire. These infusions were believed to stimulate circulation, soothe aching muscles, and ward off illnesses that winter brought in droves. Drinking these warm concoctions wasn't just medicinal, it was ritualistic, a comforting act that bridged body and spirit. Honey or a splash of mead sometimes sweetened the bitter herbal flavors, turning remedies into small pleasures. Historians still debate how much real medicinal effect these drinks had versus their psychological benefits, but their importance in daily life is unquestioned. Some peasants even rubbed herbal salves made from animal fats mixed with herbs onto their skin before bed, a gritty, greasy defense against frostbite. A quirky tidbit: certain herbs were thought to repel evil spirits or winter curses, blurring the line between medicine and magic. So sipping your chamomile tea tonight, remember this blend of science and superstition kept medieval folk warm and hopeful. You've probably heard the saying, a little something to warm your bones, and medieval peasants took that to heart. Alcohol was a staple during the coldest nights. Mugs of ale, mead, or cider were common, believed to provide a warming glow that chased away the chill. But here's the catch: while alcohol causes blood vessels near the skin to dilate, making you feel warm, it actually lowers your core body temperature, increasing the risk of hypothermia. Despite warnings in medieval medical texts about drinking in the cold, alcohol remained a social and psychological balm during harsh winters. Historians still debate how much peasants understood about alcohol's warming myth versus its real dangers. A quirky fact: warming spices like cinnamon and ginger were sometimes added to drinks, creating a rudimentary hot toddy to soothe cold fingers and spirits. So, while a swig of ale might have felt like a cozy companion, it was a double-edged sword, a comfort with hidden risks in the fight against winter's bite. As the chill deepens and the fire dims, medieval peasants turned to nightly rituals blending practical preparation and superstition. Before crawling into their straw beds, they gathered firewood, laid out warm clothes, and ensured the hearth was well stocked. These routines weren't just chores, they were acts of survival, practiced with a mixture of hope and reverence. Many villagers hung protective herbs like sage or rosemary around doorways, whispering prayers or incantations to ward off evil spirits believed to lurk in winter's darkness. Historians still debate whether these customs were sincere beliefs or comforting traditions passed down through generations. A quirky detail: some communities timed bedtime with the moon's phases, believing that sleeping under a waxing moon brought better protection against cold and disease. It's a fascinating blend of astronomy and folklore. These rituals helped calm anxious minds and reinforced communal bonds, turning the long, dark nights into manageable challenges rather than insurmountable threats. So as you settle in tonight, imagine joining in these age-old preparations, a dance of sweat, superstition, and stubborn hope that made the cold just a bit more bearable. You might think sleeping is just about comfort, but in medieval times, how you positioned your body was a crucial part of staying warm. Curling up tight into a ball, minimizing exposed skin, helped trap your body heat, much like animals hibernating through winter. You press your limbs close, conserving precious warmth as the cold creeps closer. Peasants often slept close to walls made of stone or timber that absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly through the night. Sharing beds with family members or neighbors was common, pooling body heat to combat the unforgiving cold. Historians still debate how widespread these communal sleeping arrangements were, but evidence suggests they were essential in the harshest climates. A quirky tidbit: some peasants wrapped their feet in layers of cloth or fur, crafting rudimentary foot warmers that protected extremities most vulnerable to frostbite. Your modern mattress and duvet might offer cozy luxury, but medieval sleeping positions were a matter of survival, a quiet, instinctive battle against winter's relentless bite. The cold wasn't just a battle of flesh and bone, it was a contest of spirit and mind. Medieval peasants developed remarkable psychological resilience to endure nights where warmth was scarce and darkness endless. They turned to storytelling, humor, and prayer to fortify themselves against despair. You imagine sitting close to the hearth, sharing tales that made the frost outside feel a little less menacing. Some believed that warm thoughts, blessings, or charms could actually keep cold spirits at bay. Mental shields as vital as woolen layers or blazing fires. Historians still debate how much these beliefs genuinely influenced physical endurance, but their role in community bonding and morale is undeniable. Here's a quirky insight. In some regions, peasants practiced a form of medieval visualization, imagining summer fields or sunny skies to mentally combat winter's chill, a primitive mindfulness technique. So when you feel a shiver tonight, remember your ancestors' battle was fought as much in their hearts and minds as in their frostbitten fingers. With such limited resources, every thread of clothing mattered. Peasants became experts at mending and maintaining their garments, prolonging their use through harsh winters. You can almost see a woman hunched over her needle by candlelight, carefully stitching patches onto coarse wool or linen to patch a tear. Clothing was turned inside out, patched with scraps, and sometimes even repurposed into new items. Leather boots, often stuffed with straw for insulation, were meticulously repaired, replacing soles or tightening straps. Historians still debate the availability of textiles and dyes for peasants, but it's clear that making do was the rule, not the exception. A quirky tidbit: to freshen smelly clothes, peasants sprinkled powdered chalk or ashes, an early form of deodorizing that was probably less than pleasant. This diligent care wasn't just about warmth, it was about survival and dignity. A well-maintained garment could mean the difference between life and death in winter's grasp. So while your modern wardrobe might be vast and disposable, medieval clothing carried story sewn into every patch. As the first light of dawn softens the edge of the long, cold night, you reflect on the quiet resilience that saw medieval peasants through bone-chilling winters. Their survival was a tapestry woven from simple shelters, layers of coarse cloth, warm bodies pressed close, and small fires crackling against the dark. You think of heated stones tucked beneath straw beds, the herbal brews warming trembling hands, and the unspoken strength of communal rituals and mental fortitude. Historians still debate the details, but the core truth remains: survival was as much about creativity and community as it was about endurance. In our modern, heated world, these ancient methods remind us of the human spirit's capacity to adapt and persevere. They teach us that warmth is never just physical, it's also found in connection, routine, and hope. So as you pull your blanket tighter tonight, carry with you the enduring warmth of those who face the coldest nights with nothing but grit and determination. Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into the bone-chilling grip of medieval winter. So when the sun dipped early, the wind bit mercilessly, and frost was less of a nuisance and more of a relentless predator. You trudged through icy streets with frozen breath, knowing that without some serious survival smarts, you probably won't make it through the night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time below. I'm curious who's joining me on this frosty journey. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's story together. The medieval night wasn't just dark, it was a prolonged assault on your very being. Winters could stretch long, with up to 14 hours of darkness and temperatures plunging far below freezing. You stand in a small village where your home offers little refuge: a modest wooden cottage, thin walls, and a tiny hearth barely pushing back the cold. Historians tell us these winters were brutal. The Little Ice Age, spanning centuries, froze rivers, shortened growing seasons, and threatened survival. Without central heating, insulated clothing, or medical care, the common folk faced a nightly battle against frostbite, hypothermia, and despair. Historians still argue whether peasants fully understood the science of cold or relied on passed-down wisdom mixed with superstition. What's clear is that the survival tricks they developed were vital, sometimes quirky, and often born from sheer necessity. So, as the icy wind seeps beneath your cloak and the dark thickens around your village, prepare to learn how medieval peasants lived and endured through bone-chilling nights. Stepping inside your medieval cottage, the first thing you notice is how fragile your shelter truly is against winter's relentless assault. These homes were humbly timber frames filled with wattle and daub, walls of mud and straw, but every bit mattered in holding back the cold. The thatched roof, thick with straw or reeds, wasn't just rustic charm, it was essential insulation, keeping rain and snow at bay while trapping heat inside. Windows were tiny slits, sometimes patched with animal hide or oiled parchment since glass was rare and expensive, limiting heat loss but also dimming your world. The floor was often bare earth, cold and damp, but peasants scattered rushes or straw to add a thin barrier between skin and frost. Beds might be raised slightly off the ground to avoid the chill rising from the soil and to keep pests at bay. Historians still debate how effective these materials were, and whether peasants consciously improved insulation or simply endured drafts as an unavoidable hardship. Some evidence points to regular application of mud plaster to seal cracks, and use of heavy curtains or tapestries to trap warmth indoors. A quirky detail: smoke holes or simple chimneys venting hearth smoke were double-edged swords, letting precious warmth escape while preventing suffocation. Managing this was an art passed down through generations. So, while modern walls are marvels of insulation, these modest medieval homes were the first and often only defense against winter's bite. You gather near the hearth, the vital pulse of your medieval home, where flickering flames promise life amid the biting cold. The fire provides warmth, cooks your meager meals, and offers light in an otherwise dark, frozen world. Keeping the hearth alive is a constant task. Wood must be gathered, chopped, and stacked well before winter's worst nights. The fire's glow keeps frost at bay, but its smoke fills cramped rooms, as chimneys were simple or non-existent, allowing thick, choking haze to hang in the air. Historians still debate whether peasants truly understood ventilation techniques or survived by trial and error, but the hearth's central role in survival is undeniable. Fire dogs, iron stands holding logs, were sometimes used to improve burning efficiency and reduce smoke. The hearth was also a social hub, where families shared stories, plans, and warmth. Yet the risk was ever present. A stray spark could ignite straw bedding or thatch roofs, turning a refuge into a fiery trap. So, while modern heating feels effortless, medieval hearths were hard-won lifeline as a fragile flames fighting against an unforgiving winter night. You pull on your layers like armor against the relentless frost. Medieval peasants understood that no single garment could fend off the cold. Instead, they built warmth layer by layer. Imagine the rough linen shirt closest to your skin, breathable but coarse, followed by thicker woolen tunics that trap heat even when damp. Over this, a heavy cloak or animal skin shields you from biting winds. Wool was king of insulation. Its natural crimp traps warm air, and it remains effective even when wet. Unlike most fabrics, linen, meanwhile, helped wick moisture away, crucial for avoiding chilling dampness. Animal skins were prized for their windproof qualities. Historians still debate the extent to which quality woolen skins were accessible to common folk. Many peasants likely wore patched, hand-spun garments, making do with what they had. A quirky survival hack was wrapping strips of cloth tightly around limbs of primitive leg or arm warmers to stave off frostbite. Layering had its drawbacks. A heavy, itchy fabrics could restrict movement, and wet clothes risked chilling you worse than being bare. Still, these layers were vital. If scratchy, shield against winter's bite. So while you zip your modern jacket with ease, remember medieval folk layered coarse cloths as armor against a colder, harsher world. Your bed isn't just a place of rest, it's a battleground against the cold. Medieval peasants fashioned their mattresses from thick layers of straw, hay, or sometimes feathers if they were fortunate. These straw ticks were stuffed tightly to trap warm air, creating a barrier between your body and the icy floor. You settle onto the prickly straw, feeling it slowly soak up your body heat. It's not plush, but it's effectively a natural insulator that muffles drafts and keeps the cold at bay. On top, thick woolen blankets or animal pelts add layers of warmth, their smells mingling into a rustic blend of earth and smoke. A quirky detail: some peasants layered dried cow dung beneath their bedding, believing its insulating properties help trap heat. Though it sounds unpleasant, methane trapped in dried dung does provide decent insulation. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but it's a testament to human ingenuity in desperate times. Beds were often raised off the ground to avoid dampness and pests. Some shared beds to pull body warmth, a communal tactic we'll explore more soon. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, Spare a thought for these humble beds that turned simple cottages into shields against medieval winter's bite. The cold isn't just a battle between you and the weather, it's a battle for every bit of warmth you can find. One of your warmest allies, the animals living alongside you. Picture sharing your small cottage with cows, goats, or pigs, their body heat radiating a gentle warmth in the biting chill. Bringing livestock indoors during winter was common practice, not just for safety from predators but for their heat. The thick fur and steady breathing of these creatures created a living furnace, buffering the cold that seeped through poorly insulated walls. Historians still argue whether this was primarily a convenience or a deliberate heat strategy. Either way, the warmth animals provided was crucial. Some folk believed animals could transfer their life warmth to humans, a comforting superstition in harsh times. Living with animals meant accepting their smells, noises, and pests, but the trade-off for shared warmth was more than worth it. Next time you cuddle a pet, remember medieval peasants depended on four-legged and warmth in a literal, life-saving way. When frost bites deep, people become the greatest source of warmth. Imagine a cramped medieval cottage where families and sometimes even neighbors huddle close together, bodies pressed tight against one another in a desperate bid to fend off the cold. Communal sleeping wasn't just a social norm, it was survival. You can almost feel the heat radiating from a cluster of people sharing a narrow bed or straw mattress. Privacy was sacrificed for warmth, as layering bodies became the best natural blanket available. Historians still debate how widespread these arrangements were, but accounts show they were common during the harshest winters. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villages had shared blankets or cloths large enough to cover several sleepers at once, maximizing heat retention and creating a communal cocoon against winter's chill. Of course, such closeness bred challenges. Illness spread more easily, and disrupted sleep was inevitably, but warmth and survival always took precedence. So as you lay alone in your spacious, heated bed tonight, spare a thought for those whose survival depended on the warmth of many bodies pressed tight in the darkness. The fire has dwindled to embers, and the long night stretches ahead, but medieval peasants had a clever secret to keep their beds warm: heated stones and embers. Imagine a flat stone glowing red from hours in the hearth, carefully wrapped in cloth and tucked under your blankets. It radiates gentle heat, warding off the chill when tending a fire all night isn't possible. These fireless warmers conserved precious fuel and provided steady, safe heat. Some peasants even carried smaller heated stones in their pockets as makeshift hand warmers during frosty mornings. Historians debate the prevalence of this practice, but evidence points to its use across various regions. A quirky detail: hollowed-out bricks filled with hot embers also served as warmers, radiating heat without direct flame contact. Handling these warm objects wasn't without risk of burns or kamona, but the reward was a warmer, more restful night. So, while modern heating systems make warmth effortless, these simple, natural methods showcase medieval ingenuity in the relentless fight against winter's cold. When the cold gnaws deep, medieval peasants turned inward, brewing herbal concoctions to warm body and spirit. Imagine the scent of rosemary, thyme, and mint steeping in boiling water beside the hearth. These infusions were believed to stimulate circulation, soothe aching muscles, and stave off illnesses that winter invited. These drinks often included honey or a splash of mead, turning bitter herbs into comforting potions. Historians still debate the medicinal efficacy of these brews versus their psychological benefits, but their role in daily life was crucial. Some peasants also rubbed herbal salves made from animal fats mixed with herbs and onto their skin as protection against frostbite, a greasy but practical defense. A quirky tidbit: certain herbs were thought to repel evil spirits or curses associated with winter's darkness, blending medicine with magic in a way that brought comfort and hope. So, as you sip your modern herbal tea tonight, remember these ancient brews that brought warmth and resilience to medieval souls facing the cold. You've probably heard that a drink can warm you up, and medieval peasants certainly believed it. Ale, mead, and cider were staples during winter nights, offering not just comfort but a perceived glow of warmth. But here's the truth: alcohol causes blood vessels to dilate near the skin, giving a fleeting sensation of heat, yet it actually lowers your core body temperature, making you more susceptible to hypothermia. Despite medieval medical warnings about drinking in the cold, alcohol remained a social and psychological crutch during harsh winters. Historians still debate how much peasants understood the risks versus the benefits of alcohol's warming effect. A quirky fact: warming spices like cinnamon and ginger were sometimes added to drinks, creating early versions of the hot toddy to soothe cold hands and spirits. So, while a mug of ale might feel like a cozy companion, it was a double-edged sword, a brief comfort with hidden dangers in the fight against winter's chill. As the night deepens and the hearth's glow dims, peasants turn to rituals, blending practical tasks with superstition to prepare for the cold hours ahead. They gather firewood, arrange bedding, and layer clothes carefully. These nightly routines were more than chores, they were acts of hope and survival. Bundles of protective herbs like sage or rosemary hung by doorways, believed to ward off evil spirits lurking in the dark. Prayers and incantations were whispered, and familiar customs offered comfort amid uncertainty. Historians still debate how much of these practices stemmed from deep belief versus comforting tradition. A quirky detail: some villages timed bedtime with the moon's phases, thinking that sleeping under a waxing moon brought better protection against cold and disease. A curious blend of astronomy and folklore. These rituals eased anxiety and reinforced community bonds, turning the daunting winter night into a manageable challenge. So as you settle tonight, imagine joining these age-old preparations, a dance of sweat, superstition, and stubborn hope that made cold nights just a bit more bearable. Sleeping isn't just about comfort, it's a vital strategy for warmth. Medieval peasants curled up tight, minimizing exposed skin to trap body heat. Much like animals preparing for winter, you press your limbs close, your breath warm against chilled air. Walls of stone or timber absorbed daytime heat, releasing it slowly at night, so sleeping near them was a subtle but effective defense. Families often shared beds or crowded into small spaces, pooling warmth against frostbite. Historians still debate how universal these arrangements were, but evidence suggests they were key in cold climates. A quirky tidbit: some wrapped feet in layers of cloth or fur, crafting early foot warmers to protect vulnerable toes. Your modern mattress offers luxury, but medieval sleeping postures were a quiet, instinctive war against winter's relentless bite. The cold wasn't just a physical foe, it was a test of mental endurance. Medieval peasants cultivated psychological resilience to survive nights when warmth was scarce and darkness unending. Stories, humor, and prayer served as shields against despair. You imagine gathering around the hearth, sharing tales that made winter's bite feel less fierce. Some believed warm thoughts or charms could fend off cold spirits, blending belief and practicality. Historians still debate how much these mental defenses impacted physical endurance, but their role in community and morale is undeniable. Here's a quirky insight: some peasants practiced a kind of medieval visualization, imagining sunny fields or summer warmth to trick their minds into feeling warmer, a primitive mindfulness. So next time you shiver, remember your ancestors fought frost with both body and mind, a blend of grit, belief, and hope. Clothing wasn't disposable, it was precious and carefully maintained. Peasants became masters of mending, turning worn garments inside out, patching holes, and repurposing fabric scraps to stretch their wardrobes through brutal winters. You can picture someone bent over a needle, stitching by candlelight, every thread a lifeline. Boots stuffed with straw for insulation were repaired repeatedly, as replacing footwear was costly. Historians still debate the availability of materials and dyes for common folk, but it's clear that resourcefulness was essential. A quirky tip: chalk or ashes were sprinkled on clothes to freshen them, an early deodorizer, albeit a gritty one. This relentless care wasn't just about warmth but survival and dignity. Every patch told a story of resilience. So, while modern fashion is fleeting, medieval garments carried history sewn into every fiber. As dawn's pale light softens the grip of the long night, you reflect on the quiet resilience that carried medieval peasants through bone-chilling winters. Their survival was woven from simple shelters, layered clothing, shared warmth, and flickering fires, each a thread in a tapestry of endurance. You remember heated stones tucked beneath straw beds, herbal brews warming aching hands, and the mental fortitude forged by shared stories and rituals. Historians still debate details, but the essence remains. Survival was a blend of ingenuity, community, and grit. In our modern warmth, these ancient methods remind us of human adaptability and the deep connections between people and place. Warmth is not just physical, it's found in connection, routine, and hope. So as you pull your blanket close tonight, carry the enduring warmth of those who faced the coldest nights with nothing but courage and resolve. Hey guys, tonight we step into a world so cold it bites straight through your woolen layers and settles deep into your bones as the brutal winters faced by medieval peasants. Imagine waking up before dawn to a world glazed in frost, the breath you exhale hanging in the air like a ghost, while the ground crunches beneath your feet like shattered glass. The sky's still a dim, icy gray, and the sun hasn't bothered to show itself yet. You trudge through this frozen wasteland, knowing that if you don't get your fire going and your chores done quickly, the cold might just claim you before midday. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this if you're not careful. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments so I can see who's braving the cold with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in a small, dark hut, the chill hitting your skin like an unwelcome visitor. The wooden walls are thin, the roof barely shielding you from the biting wind that whistles through the cracks. Outside, the world is a silver nightmare, fields dusted in frost, trees skeletal and brittle. Your breath puffs out in little clouds as you step onto the frozen dirt floor, careful not to slip. The dawn has yet to break, leaving you to rely on a faint glow from the dying embers of last night's fire. This isn't just cold, it's a harsh, relentless enemy. Winters in medieval Europe could drag on for months, especially during the so-called Little Ice Age. When temperatures dropped noticeably, farmers and peasants had to survive not only the chill but the ever-present threat of starvation and disease. Historians still argue whether the extreme cold of these centuries directly caused widespread famine, but the hardships are clear. You grab a coarse wool cloak, its fibers stiff and prickly against your skin. The wind bites harder now, and your fingers sting. The roads outside are frozen solid, making travel dangerous and slow. There's no morning coffee or central heating here, just a smoky fire pit, some stale bread, and a long day ahead. Welcome to a world where every moment is a battle against winter's bite. You pull the rough wool cloak tighter around your shoulders, the itchy fabric rubbing against your skin like a persistent mosquito. Wool was the medieval peasant's first line of defense against winter's unforgiving chill. Layers upon layers of it, often patched and worn from years of use. Despite its scratchiness, wool's natural fibers trap air and insulate you, keeping body heat close. You might complain about the itch, but compared to freezing to death, it's a small price to pay. Underneath the cloak, you layer a linen shirt, then a woolen tunic, and if you're lucky, a cloak lined with sheepskin or an extra thick hood to shield your head and ears. The headgear is vital, because as any modern doctor would tell you, you lose a lot of heat through your head. But forget about fancy hats, your cap might be little more than a simple, hand-sewn pouch with a few holes for eyes. The problem is, wool isn't waterproof. You know that all too well from the wet snow that seeps through your sleeves and chills your bones. To combat this, peasants often rubbed animal fat or tallow on their outer layers, creating a crude barrier against moisture. It's a grimy solution, but it worked better than nothing. Oddly enough, in some remote villages, people even used boiled animal brains as a kind of soft leather treatment for clothing, a technique historians still debate whether it actually helped or was just a desperate superstition. Your boots, if they qualify, are heavy leather, probably stuffed with straw for insulation. Handmade mittens, similarly stuffed or lined, protect your fingers, though frostbite still manages to creep in sometimes, especially during those long, dark nights when your body is exhausted. And then there's the weight. Layering all these clothes means you move slower, your steps heavier, your body more sluggish, but you get used to it. Winter isn't a time for running marathons, it's a time for conserving energy and staying alive. You might look like a walking bundle of patched fabric and straw, but each layer is a small victory over the cold. Sometimes, you find an old furry rabbit, fox, or even badger used to line your clothes or draped over your shoulders for extra warmth. The wealthy might have ermine or sable, but for peasants, it's whatever the forest offers. These pelts add precious insulation but are also a sign of hard times. Hunting wasn't just a pastime but a necessity. So, while you grumble about the itchiness and the weight, remember that woolen furs were your medieval armor against winter. Historians still argue whether the typical peasant's winter clothing was sufficient or if many simply succumbed to exposure. Either way, these humble layers kept you one step ahead of the frost. You step into your tiny hut, the door creaking shut behind you as the cold wind howls outside like a hungry wolf. Inside, smoke curls lazily from the small fire pit in the center, swirling upward and pooling beneath the low, blackened ceiling. The air is thick with the acrid scent of peat and wood smoke, a choking, persistent presence that makes your eyes water and your throat itch. Yet, this smoky haze is your lifeline, your fragile shield against the creeping cold. There's no chimney here, no fancy ventilation to whisk the smoke away. The design is simple, a fire built on the dirt floor, and a hole in the roof letting out some of the smoke. The rest lingers, clinging to the beams and walls, coating everything in a sooty film. Peasants accepted this smoky sacrifice because warmth meant survival. You might cough and wheeze, but you'd rather breathe smoke than freeze. The hearth itself is the heart of your home. It provides heat for cooking, drying clothes, and scaring off the chill that seeps in through every crack and crevice. At night, you huddle close, sharing the scant warmth with your family and animals, sometimes chickens or even a cow squeezed inside for shelter and heat. The irony isn't lost on you. Your livestock, your providers, are also your personal radiators. You arrange stones around the fire to absorb and slowly release heat, creating a crude bench to sit on. Some huts had a stone slab called a sleeper near the fiery cold to the touch at first but warming slowly, perfect for resting tired feet. These small comforts are precious in a world where a draft means death. The smoke also had unexpected benefits. Some believe it kept insects away and helped preserve the thatched roof from pests and rot. Historians still argue whether this smoke-filled living was more harmful than helpful in the long run, considering the respiratory illnesses common among peasants. You carefully poke the fire, sending sparks dancing upward, the warmth licking your skin. The flickering flames offer a strange kind of company. Their crackle a quiet reminder that life persists, even in the darkest, coldest times. The smell of burning wood and peat seeps into your clothes and hair, a scent forever linked to survival and home. You glance at the blackened walls and ceiling, soot streaked like an ancient cave painting, wondering if your hut will last another winter. The smoke will stain everything, but without it, the cold would be your immediate enemy. You remind yourself that this smoky haze is the price you pay for life. During the biting medieval winters, your stomach growls as the bitter cold gnaws away at your insides, a reminder that winter's chill isn't just about frozen skin, but also hunger. Food is scarce, and your diet is a monotonous loop of whatever root vegetables, dried grains, and salted meats you managed to store before the frost took hold. Fresh produce is a distant memory, buried under thick blankets of snow. You eye the small loaf of rye bread you've rationed for the day, wondering how many meals it will have to stretch into. Winter was famine's favorite season. Crops failed, livestock thinned, and the granaries emptied too quickly. Peasants learned to make every morsel count, turning leftover broth into thick stews, mixing grains with acorns or even tree bark when desperation hit. Some communities fermented cabbage into sauerkraut, a rare source of vitamin C, to stave off scurvy. You're lucky if you've got a few preserved root veggies like turnips or parsnips. You sip on a thin broth, made from scraps of vegetables and bones simmered for hours, extracting every last bit of flavor and nutrition. It's far from delicious, but it's life-giving. You remind yourself, during the harshest winters, simply eating enough to survive was a daily challenge. Wild game was scarce or strictly off-limits by law, making hunting a risky, often desperate act. Here's the quirky bit. Some peasants resorted to eating black pudding, a kind of blood sausage made from pig's blood mixed with grains and spices. It might sound odd now, but it was a vital protein source, and many swore by its warming properties. Not exactly a delicacy, but it did the job. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had enough stored food to survive the cold months comfortably or if many perished quietly from malnutrition and exposure. What's clear is that winter was a season of endurance, where food scarcity added to the biting cold as a relentless foe. You look around your humble kitchen, a wooden bowls, cracked pots, a few dried herbs hanging on the wall, and give thanks for what little you have. Every crumb matters when the world outside is frozen solid. You step outside your hut, the world a frozen wasteland stretching endlessly beneath a pale, lifeless sky. The fields where you once sowed seeds are now locked in ice, their fertile promise buried beneath a crust of frost. Snow crunches beneath your boots, and the cold air bites harder with every breath. It's a landscape frozen in time, as if the earth itself has been paused, waiting patiently for spring's warmth to coax life from its grasp. Farming in winter? Forget it. The soil is too hard to till, the seeds too vulnerable to frost. Instead, you rely heavily on what you've stored: a root cellars packed with turnips, cabbages, and onions, granaries filled with last autumn's barley and rye. Preserving food was an art, and every peasant household developed secret techniques for drying, salting, and smoking to stretch supplies through the long cold. The frozen land tested not just your patience, but your hope. Each day was a waiting game. You might watch as snowdrifts pile higher, wondering if they'll choke the life from the earth come spring. Historians still argue whether these long, harsh winters contributed to societal upheaval, but there's no doubt they shaped peasant life in profound ways. Despite the stillness, life persisted in small ways. Some hardy vegetables, like kale and leeks, endured the cold better than others, offering brief bursts of green in the white landscape. You might even find wild nuts or berries frozen and shriveled, a rare treat for those who dared to forage. The weight of frozen fields presses on you, a reminder of nature's indifference. But beneath that ice, you know the earth is resting, regenerating. You clutch your coat tighter and step back inside, where the fire awaits, and the hope of thaw warms you more than any flame. Inside your cramped hut, warmth is a precious commodity, and you share it with more than just your family. Your livestock, usually a cow, a pig, or a handful of chickens, are crammed into the same shelter, their bodies radiating heat that you secretly appreciate. It's not the most pleasant arrangement, but in winter, these animals double as living heaters, their steady breaths fogging the chilly air, and their warmth seeping into the wooden walls. Sometimes, your bed is literally a pile of straw or rushes mixed with animal hair, where you and your loved ones lay close for warmth. There's a practical reason you allow animals inside. Their body heat raises the hut's temperature by several degrees, sometimes enough to keep frost from settling on the floor overnight. The closeness means you breathe the same air as your animals, and yes, sometimes deal with the smell and mess. But during the longest, coldest nights, the trade-off is worth it. You might wake up to the comforting sound of a cow's gentle moo or the soft clucking of hens, small reminders that life endures even when the world outside is frozen solid. Interestingly, in some villages, peasants were known to use animal hides as blankets or even as curtains to block drafts. One quirky practice involved hanging cured animal skins around doorways and windows, a sort of an early insulation tactic. Whether this actually made a measurable difference or was just a superstition is something historians continue to debate. Your livestock's survival is critical too. Keeping them alive through winter means food and warmth for yourself in the spring. You feed them hay or whatever scraps you can muster, knowing that a lost animal could spell disaster. Some households even kept small fires going near the animals' stalls to keep the cold at bay. So while the idea of animals doubling as heaters might seem odd or uncomfortable today, for medieval peasants, it was a necessary, if smelly, part of enduring winter's harsh grip. You're not alone in this struggle. Winter forces everyone in the village to band together like a cold weather survival squad, whether you want to or not. Snow piles up, blocking paths and making travel treacherous. So neighbors rally to clear roads with shovels or wooden tools, their breath visible in the frigid air as they grunt and sweat through the labor. This communal work wasn't just about convenience, it was survival. Sharing resources becomes vital. If your neighbor's firewood runs low, you might lend them a bundle, trusting that they'll return the favor, or maybe not. But winter tends to soften grudges, at least temporarily. Villagers swap food, firewood, and clothing patches. This mutual aid sometimes meant the difference between life and death during the cruelest months. Beyond physical tasks, communal labor involved sharing knowledge, too. Elderly villagers passed down tips on preserving food or treating frostbite. Even in winter's gloom, social bonds were strengthened around the fire, where gossip and stories flowed as freely as the meager ale. Sometimes, entire families huddled in a single hut, overcrowding but combining warmth and hope. You might grumble about the lack of privacy, but in winter, the price of solitude is cold fingers and frostbite. Interestingly, some medieval villages had winter guilds or informal groups dedicated to managing communal winter tasks. Whether this was formalized or just village lore is still debated among scholars, but the idea of collective responsibility in harsh times feels timeless. You notice how the village feels quieter in winter, the usual bustle dampened by cold, but there's an underlying hum of shared purpose. You're part of a community that depends on each other more than ever. This interdependence keeps you going, even when the wind howls like a pack of wolves outside. So next time you complain about shoveling snow, remember, medieval peasants had to do it just to survive, often without the luxury of a warm drink to reward them. The biting cold outside isn't the only threat to your health during winter. Inside your hut, your body fights invisible enemies, a frostbite, chilblains, and the relentless aches of winter illnesses. You rub your reddened fingers, stiff and tingling, hoping the pain will fade before it turns into something worse. Medieval medicine is a patchwork of herbal remedies, old wives' tales, and a pinch of superstition, and sometimes it feels like the cure is as risky as the illness. You might wrap your hands and feet in soft linen soaked in warm herbal infusion, some marigold, yarrow, or willow bark, plants known to soothe inflammation. Poultices made from crushed herbs and animal fats are applied to frostbitten skin, a gooey mess that smells as bad as it looks but promises relief. Some villagers carry amulets or charms, believing these ward off the cold's harmful spirits, while others resort to smearing crocodile dung on their skin, an odd practice mentioned in a few medieval texts that historians still argue about regarding its actual use and effectiveness. Fevers, coughs, and chest infections are common, exacerbated by the smoky huts in close quarters with both humans and animals. Your lungs protest every smoky breath, and your cough echoes in the small space. You know well the dangers of pneumonia, though it's not a word you'd use. Healing was often about managing symptoms and hoping for the best, with the help of local wise women or traveling healers. Despite the rudimentary knowledge, some treatments had surprising effectiveness. Honey, for example, was used as a wound dressing for its antibacterial properties, and garlic was a go-to for colds and respiratory issues. The line between medicine and magic was blurred, and in many ways, that blurred boundary was all you had to cling to. Winter illnesses were relentless. But so were you. You carry on, fueled by stubbornness and the hope that spring will bring warmth and maybe a healer with better cures. The day outside remains stubbornly short, and darkness creeps in early, like a thick blanket smothering the village. You've learned to accept the dimness as part of the winter routine after all. There's little use for daylight when frost rules the land. Candles, made from tallow or beeswax if you're lucky, are precious commodities. Burn sparingly to stretch through long evenings. You might find yourself peering into their flickering flames, mesmerized, as the shadows dance across your soot-streaked walls. Morning light feels like a distant dream during the depths of winter. You trudge through the cold before the sun even rises, often working by the faint glow of a wooden torch or a weak candle. Historians still argue how much these short days affected peasant productivity, but there's no doubt that less sunlight meant less time to work the fields or tend animals. Inside your hut, the dark can be oppressive, but you find small ways to fight it. Mirrors were rare, but shiny metal utensils sometimes served to reflect the limited light, spreading it just enough to read or sew. The flicker of firelight becomes a kind of comfort, a tiny rebellion against the overwhelming gloom. You understand that this darkness isn't just physical, it weighs on the spirit. People whisper about the long night as more than a season, it's a state of mind. Some believe that the sun itself sleeps through winter, and only rituals and prayers can coax it awake. Winter festivals like Yule bring brief bursts of joy, light, and community, breaking the monotony of dark days. By the time you finally lay down to rest, the cold has seeped into your bones despite the fire's glow. You clutch your woolen blankets, willing the night to pass quickly so you can face another day in winter's grip. It's a slow, steady battle against the dark, with only the promise of dawn to keep you going. You fumble with your footwear, sliding your feet into the fur-lined boots your mother painstakingly crafted last autumn. These aren't just any boots, they're a critical piece of your winter arsenal. While wool keeps you warm, it's the fur that really seals the deal against icy winds and frozen ground. Soft belts sewn inside and outside the boots cradle your feet, trapping warmth and preventing frostbite from creeping in. Mittens, stuffed with wool or animal hair, hug your hands like tiny, warm sacks. You sometimes poke your fingers out, daring to touch the frozen air before retreating quickly. Gloves are rare. Mittens were simpler to make and much warmer. And when snow piles high, these gloves and boots become your lifeline, allowing you to work and move without losing limbs to the cold. Beyond clothing, some villagers made ingenious winter gear: fur-lined hoods with flaps to protect cheeks, scarves woven tightly from thick yarn, and even foot wraps made from linen and wool layered together. These weren't fashion statements, they were survival tools. The heavier and more cumbersome the gear, the better it was at keeping out the cold. Interestingly, the use of animal pelts wasn't without social significance. Wearing fur could mark status or wealth in some regions, though most peasants used whatever they could scavenge. Some wore the hides of wild animals, believing they imbued the wearer with strength or protection. Whether this was mere superstition or a genuine psychological boost is something historians still debate. You tug your hood up, feeling the fur brush your cheeks, a small comfort against the winter wind that howls outside. It's not a warm embrace, but it's enough to keep the frost at bay as you step outside to face the frozen world once more. The fire crackles, sending flickers of light dancing on the soot-blackened walls of your hut. You lean in close, grateful for every ounce of warmth the hearth can offer. Medieval peasants didn't just throw logs on a pile, they crafted their fires carefully, using hearth designs optimized for the cold months. A stone or clay-lined hearth retained heat longer, radiating a slow, steady warmth long after the flames died down. Some homes featured a stone bench near the fire, called a sleeper, where you could rest and soak in the heat. At first, the stones were cold and hard beneath you, but as they absorbed the fire's energy, they became surprisingly warm, or your toes would thank you. It's a small luxury in a world where heat is scarce and precious. You notice how smoke tends to linger, but clever ventilation, like small roof holes or slanted walls, helped keep air moving without losing too much warmth. Some peasants stuffed straw or wool into cracks around doors and windows to trap the heat inside. Others hung heavy cloth or animal hides as makeshift curtains to block drafts. A quirky fact: in certain regions, people built warming benches with hollow spaces underneath where hot ashes or embers were stored to keep the seat cozy. You might also find a foot warmer, a metal box filled with hot coals and covered in cloth, a portable solution to cold feet during long nights. Historians still argue how widespread these heating innovations were among peasants, but evidence from archaeological digs suggests many were surprisingly resourceful. You realize that surviving winter wasn't just about putting on layers, it was about making your home a warm sanctuary. You curl up on your sleeper bench, the heat seeping into your tired bones, a fleeting comfort before another frozen day dawns. Despite the chill that gnaws at your bones, life inside your hut isn't all hardship. When the fire crackles bright and the smoke settles just right, you find moments of warmth that feel almost like luxury. Storytelling fills the air, voices soft and low, weaving tales of saints, heroes, and mischievous spirits. These stories wrap around you like an invisible blanket, warming your heart even as the frost bites outside. Children play simple games, their laughter a rare light in the gloom. You pass around a carved wooden ball or try your hand at riddles, using whatever scraps of entertainment you can muster. Music is rare but treasure at a crude flute or a scraping fiddle, coaxing melodies that lift spirits and chase away the winter blues. Feasts are few, but when neighbors gather to share a meal, it's a celebration of survival itself. A pot of stew, thick with root vegetables and bits of salted meat, tastes like a banquet after weeks of rationing. These gatherings remind you that winter is not just about endurance but community. Interestingly, some villages observed specific winter festivals that mixed Christian traditions with older pagan rites as celebrations of light, fertility, and the promise of spring. You might find yourself part of a Yule log ceremony, where a massive piece of wood burns throughout the night, symbolizing the sun's return. Historians still debate how much these rituals helped peasants cope psychologically with winter's harshness. Even leisure had its place in survival. Dancing, singing, and simple games offered mental warmth and distraction from the endless cold. It's funny to think that amid all this struggle, you found reasons to smile and moments to forget the frost. So, as you sit by the fire, wrapped in blankets and stories, remember that winter's bite was softened by the warmth of human connection and small joys. You might think winter was an equalizer, but it wasn't. The biting cold revealed a stark social divide between you, the peasant, and the nobility, who survived winter wrapped in fur and seated near grand fireplaces. While your hut barely kept the frost at bay, manor houses boasted heated stone floors, thick tapestries, and multiple rooms filled with the comforting glow of candlelight. Your noble neighbors enjoyed luxuries like heated beds, complete with feather mattresses and woolen quilts, while you nestled in a straw-stuffed pallet, often sharing space with animals. Their kitchens produced rich stews and fresh bread year-round, thanks to pantries stocked from distant lands. You, meanwhile, survived on salted pork and whatever root vegetables endured the cold. Even the nobles' clothing far outmatched your silks, velvets, and furs that not only kept out the cold but marked status. Your patched wool tunic was a far cry from a lord's fur-lined cloak. Yet, even among the peasantry, winter hardships weren't evenly distributed. Wealthier peasants might have larger stores of food, thicker clothing, or sturdier homes with stone walls. The poorest suffered most, Vulnerable to the elements and the hunger that winter often brought, historians still debate how much this social gap influenced mortality rates during harsh winters, but the difference in comfort and survival chances was undeniable. As you trudge through the snow, seeing grand houses with smoke pouring from tall chimneys, you're reminded that winter's cold was harsher for some than others and that survival was often a matter of birthright as much as grit. As the days drag on, you feel the weight of winter not just on your body but in your spirit. The long nights, the unending cold seeps into your mood, bringing what modern folks might call seasonal depression. You feel listless, your thoughts heavy as the snow outside. Yet, medieval peasants understood this gloom in their own way, weaving it into their beliefs and rituals. Many thought winter's darkness was a test, a time when evil spirits roamed freely and the sun's light was trapped. To fight this, they held festivals like Yule or Candlemas, lighting fires, candles, and bonfires to chase away the darkness. These rituals weren't just superstition, they were collective acts of hope, a way to lift the communal spirit amid bleakness. Some believed in the power of sunlight returning gradually, carrying life and warmth back to the frozen earth. The slow lengthening of days became a symbol of rebirth and endurance. You watch the horizon, waiting for the faintest hint of dawn that lasts just a bit longer each day. Historians still argue how much these rituals actually impacted the psychological resilience of medieval communities. But there's no doubt that hope, whether born of faith, superstition, or simple human stubbornness, helped peasants survive not only the cold but the darkness within. You take a deep breath and whisper a prayer or a wish for the sun's return, clinging to the belief that after winter's worst comes new beginnings. The cold might freeze your body, but it won't freeze your hope. Finally, the day arrives when the air begins to soften, and the iron grip of winter starts to loosen. You step outside to a world transformed, the snow melting in slow, noisy drips, the ground beneath soggy and muddy. It's a messy, uncomfortable thaw, where the frozen fields turn into vast, sticky quagmires, and every step threatens to suck your boots off. This transition is bittersweet. The cold retreats, but the mud and dampness bring new challenges. Houses that seemed sturdy during the freeze now leak and sag. Stored food must be consumed quickly before spoilage sets in. Yet, beneath the discomfort lies hope, a promise of fresh planting, of new life. You begin preparations for spring, repairing tools, tending to surviving livestock, and planning the planting of crops that will sustain you through the next winter. The work feels endless, but it's also a renewal, a chance to reclaim the earth from winter's grasp. Historians still debate how peasants managed these muddy months, but it's clear that resilience and adaptability were key. Every year was a cycle of survival, hope, and hard work, shaped by the relentless rhythms of nature. As you watch the first buds appear on trees, the cold memories of winter begin to fade. The thaw isn't just an end, it's a new beginning. You step forward into the muddy fields, ready to face whatever the next year brings, knowing you have endured the worst and survived. Now, as you settle back into the quiet of your own space, imagine the slow fade of winter's harshness, the softening of the cold that once bit so fiercely. Let your breath slow, your muscles relax, and your thoughts drift like melting snowflakes. Gentle, peaceful, and calm. The world outside may still be chilly, but inside, warmth lingers, carried by memories of firelight and shared stories, by the simple strength of enduring together. Let that warmth settle deep within you as you rest. Know in